Hello and welcome to another episode of the ICC Academy Livecast, a new podcast series where we take a deeper dive into global business trends and ideas. I'm your host Thomas Paris, and today I'm joined by Pamela Mar, Executive Vice President of Supply Chain Futures at the Fung Academy and Director of Sustainability at the Fung Group. A few notes before we get started. This is a pre-recorded episode, which means there will not be a live chat component. However, we will be hosting live broadcasts every month throughout 2019, so if you're listening, remember to sign up on our website. Registration is free, and signing up will give you the ability to watch us live and participate with your own questions. In this episode, we will discuss what sustainability looks like in today's business ecosystem and how education is playing a key role. For those who might not be aware of the Fung Group, what can you tell us about this organization and its role in fostering sustainability?
Okay, thank you for having me. So basically, the Fung Group is a multinational based in Hong Kong that works in consumer products, primarily clothes, toys, bags, and so on. And what we do is we source and run supply chains for global brands and retailers who need to manufacture and sell these products to end consumers like yourself. And my job is to, on the one hand, at the Fung Group level, to work on sustainability of the supply chains that we manage. So it's basically to ensure the social and environmental standards of the supply chains to basically make sure that we are being a responsible citizen and that our customers, the brands, retailers, that their standards are upheld. And when I say social standards, it's basically health and safety of the factories, working conditions, working hours, protecting human rights, and so on. And eventually, it means empowering factory workers and empowering everyone on the supply chain to reach their full potential. On the environmental side, it is to respond to the increasing calls for environmental responsibility, which ranges from everything from conserving natural resources to running your operations in an environmentally efficient manner. So conserving resources, minimizing waste, cleaning up after yourself, and minimizing the use of toxic chemicals which may be harmful to either the workers or to the end users. So it's really about creating that kind of future where climate change is mitigated and where all of the other environmental risks that we see, like pollution and water scarcity and so on, where these would all be minimized. And so every business has a part to play in cleaning and maintaining environmentally responsible operations, including not only their own offices and own facilities and own stores, but also those of their upstream supply chain, even though they may not actually own their supply chain. So that's sort of in a nutshell what we regard as sustainability. Mm-hmm. And so I'm basically working on different aspects of that.
Great. So similar to the ICC Academy, the Fung Academy was launched 4 years ago, and as the education arm of the Fung Group. So what was the original vision behind launching the Fung Academy, and what was the intent behind it?
So the Fung Academy was set up because there's increasing forces of disruption in the world, which are basically changing the nature of competitiveness of businesses. So we really think that in the past, if to run a business, you need to be efficient, have huge scale, and be very cost conscious. And this is in terms of supply chain competitiveness. Basically, what is going to make you competitive in the future are some things that are very, very different. You have to be technologically forward, you have to be fast, you have to be transparent, you have to be sustainable, you have to have a level of innovation built into your system, which means that in fact you are always disrupting yourself. Mm-hmm. And because businesses which are set up for scale and efficiency sometimes have trouble disrupting themselves, and they need help to be sustainable. They need help to innovate. They need help to learn new capabilities, on the idea that the future organization which succeeds is actually going to be a learning organization. So the Academy was set up to help all of the companies within the Fung Group basically learn faster, develop new sources of competitive advantage, including the power to innovate, including the ability to be sustainable in their operations, and including the ability to build human capability in a way that's very different from in the past. That we were set up to help the group companies do that. On the basis that they're so busy running the current business that they may not have time to recognize that actually the business needs to transform while keeping the business afloat. So we're basically a transformation agent for the Fung Group, in helping the group to build new sources of competitive advantage.
Fantastic. And what are the methods that your team is using to educate this? So
we do basically three things.
Right.
One is to directly build capabilities of our people. So the first, through courses. So we do a lot of leadership training, management training. We are running courses in data science, artificial intelligence, account management, and so on. And these are basically what we call action learning. So there's a portion that's in the classroom, and then the portion that is more project-based, which is actually based on the real problems that we are finding, the real challenges that we are finding in our business. The second is to actually create the tools which will be necessary to enable our supply chain and our company to build, model, iterate, and improve on these new sources of competitive advantage. And that's largely in the present environment around technology. So how do we use new technologies in order to create competitive advantage? So for example, we're doing a lot of work with RFID and sensors. We're experimenting with blockchain. And we're basically building applications which help our suppliers and our supply chain extract more data from the supply chain in order that it can be more efficient and more sustainable. And the third way is that we want to build a culture of innovation within our company, which means encouraging people to innovate, building that culture of entrepreneurial risk-taking, bringing in startups and innovators to actually work with our business to co-create solutions on the basis that in the traditional multinational company, R&D was entirely internal, in that a company wants to do internal R&D because it wants to capture all of the IP, and so it invests a lot in internal R&D and doesn't really necessarily collaborate. And today, in today's environment, all the best solutions are being developed both with outside organizations, like through crowdsourcing ideas, and also in environments of collaboration even with their own competitors. And so we're trying to build these kind of different spirits of problem solving by helping our colleagues within the Fung Group to recognize the validity of these solutions, and then to basically model them in an environment where they can I don't want to say feel free to fail, because obviously we always want to succeed, but right. From time to time you need to fail first until you succeed later.
Right. So iterative learning process.
Yes.
Right. Great. And what types of results have you seen from these different kinds of projects? Are there certain regions that have developed differently based on the programs that you've launched?
I think in terms of results, what we can see is that there is a broad recognition within the company that we need to be more proactive in creating solutions for the challenges that we see in our supply chain. Except that what we are lacking is the methodology, the time, the resources, and the ability to capture the learning and share it widely within our organization. So what the Academy is doing is basically providing these different tools and these different methodologies. And in terms of results, we've developed applications which are now used in our supply chain as part of the operation to basically feed us more data so that we can actually stream data from the supply chain. We've developed, and an example of that is our worker app, which is used by factory workers in factories who are in our supply chain. And factories are using this to educate their workers and to survey their workers and to kind of engage their workers in ways that they haven't in the past, on the basis that an engaged worker is likely to be more productive and happy and loyal and so on, with all of the benefits that that connotes. We have also helped bring startups into working with our business, and to achieve different aims. It could be things like wearables. So how would you help a global brand or retailer develop different ways to put technology into clothes to achieve different things, health-related things, right, entertainment, emotional connection, and so on. And a lot of these are things that if we were to actually try to develop the solution in-house, it would take years. Right. And we would have to spend a lot to get the knowledge. But in today's environment where there's a lot of different organizations and startups and even academic institutions who are developing solutions, we are an opportunity for them to scale what they have and what they know. And for them, for us, that's an opportunity to get solutions with a lot faster, without an accelerated implementation path.
Right. And how would you qualify the last 10 years, I would say, in terms of the generational shift towards sustainability? So again, it varies by industry and also by region. But what would you say that the new generations of, whether it's the startups or the corporates, are a little bit more acutely aware?
Yeah, so definitely. Yeah. Sustainability has grown in importance and visibility within our industry, which is basically apparel, textiles, and consumer products. It used to be that we always, from an industry perspective, paid a lot of attention to compliance in terms of mitigating risks like reputational risk, labor risk, human rights risk, and so on. And today, actually, because of the proliferation of information and communications technologies, you can basically, if you're a consumer, no matter where you are, you can basically find out anything you want about anywhere in the world, right, which is an amazing power, because that means that we in the industry have nowhere to hide. Mm-hmm. Okay, so there's certainly a kind of pressure that we face to be more transparent and to make sure we actually do more of the right thing, and that we can actually communicate that in a way that is very fact-based, very and very realistic and very direct, because we know that everyone knows. And I think that kind of consciousness we take it as a matter of fact for new startups and companies which have grown in the age of in the digital economy, where they have started. Mm-hmm. Okay, so definitely they're more conscious mm-hmm. of sustainability and the need to be sustainable and the need to communicate your sustainability to consumers. And they recognize that consumers, at least, consumers can be incredibly fickle, mm-hmm. but if you hit that emotional connection with them, they will stick with you and they will become your champions. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, with social media, that can actually have quite exponential implications. So I think in the past 10 years, definitely for old school companies, like traditional retailers, they've had to become more conscious of sustainability. Mm-hmm. And for startups, they are actually born with that. So in a lot of ways, actually, for a startup, it's a lot easier to be sustainable because they have no baggage, they have no legacy, and they have no existing processes which were built in the age where sustainability, so-called, was less important. Right. So
much more finite resources as well.
Yes, exactly.
Sustainability in terms of long-term planning mm-hmm. is very important.
Exactly. So what we have to do, from the Fung Group perspective, and especially for our largest company, Li & Fung, is how do we help those big traditional retailers with a lot of legacy, how do we help them build on their core capabilities to become more sustainable and to reach that level where actually they can be sustainable without even thinking about it? Mm-hmm. And that means new processes, new ways of working, new mentalities and mindsets. And today more so than not, the key catalyst is actually how they're going to use technology to digitize their operations. Because sustainability is really all about knowing what's going on in your operations and using that data in order to achieve better results. So sustainability goes one step beyond compliance, in that sustainability should be self-reinforcing, and that everything that is going on in your operations naturally strives for a better social and environmental result, as well as economic result. Mm-hmm. So we need to figure out, how do we help companies who have been in the compliance mindset, i.e. follow the rules, avoid risk, protect your reputation, that compliance mindset, which is very much audit-based, to a mindset which is more expansive, which is more, there's this term abundance, mm-hmm. is that we can actually feed everyone in the world. We can run a supply chain, a fashion supply chain, which is totally circular. It's like, how do we put our innovative power and our creative power and our power of collaboration to achieve that bigger result? Mm-hmm. That's what sustainability should be aiming for. And of course, we need lots of education, and we need lots of resources, and we need to dump so many legacy behaviors which are actually holding us back. Mm-hmm. So I think everyone at least in the fashion industry recognizes this. Not everyone, maybe just the top brands, right, who want to be leaders in this space. They recognize this, and so it's all about how fast can you move to shed your old behaviors, and how fast can you move to educate your people, to really inspire them to really reach these sort of greater heights.
Right. I mean, the bigger the company, the slower the ship to turn. And so I think we've talked on 3 verticals so far, which is environmental, economic, and social. I think personally the one that larger corporations tend to bend on is the economic argument of saving money, being fiscally responsible in that sense. For larger companies, ones that do take a long time to turn, what would you say are the strongest arguments for the other 2, which is the environmental and the social components? And there are a lot of new factors, mm-hmm. new variables coming into play, like social media, which is, like you mentioned, mm-hmm. having a devastating impact sometimes when things go wrong. But aside from the negative reinforcement, mm-hmm. what has been more the way to positively reinforce on those 2, on the environmental and the social component?
So I think there's a couple ones that come to mind. Obviously first on the social and environmental, your ability as a company speaking, then the company's ability to drive environmental and social progress can actually create very good messages to establish emotional connections with their end consumers. Okay, end consumers, especially the millennials and young generation, they need that. Mm. In fact, it's a base requirement for them to actually be loyal to a brand. It's like, do I know that you're being good? Okay, and the thing is, they can tell BS when they see it. Right. So, am I allowed to say that? Okay, yes. Yeah, okay. No they worries. Can spot greenwashing from a mile away. So, so the company actually has to do the right thing, because it needs those future consumers. The second thing is that why should a company treat its supply chain workers? Why should they pay them more? Why should they pay them something which approximates a living wage? Because those are your future consumers. Mm-hmm. It goes back to what Henry Ford said when he said, I'm going to pay my workers better because they're going to buy my cars in the future. Right. Same thing. It's like in Europe, in the US, consumption is not growing that much. Okay, and the population isn't growing that much. Even in some countries, it's shrinking. So your future markets are in Asia, South Asia, Africa, and so on. So Asia already has, so Africa is actually still quite poor. So when we look at the global sources of demographic growth, it's actually all in Asia. Mm-hmm. And we look at the sources of middle class consumption growth, again, greatest drivers in Asia. So why should you treat Asian consumers well? Asian future consumers well, that means you're going to treat Asian workers well, mm-hmm. because that's your future market. So it's a very long-term vision, which I know isn't totally aligned with how stock markets work. Right. But there are more investors today who actually take corporate responsibility more seriously and who recognize that the companies who will survive and have sustainable competitive advantage are those who actually have sustainable operations. The third is actually regulatory, is that more and more countries, because they recognize that environmental and social instability is a source of social instability. Okay, so that they're worried that environmental spillovers and environmental pollution actually gets out of hand. So especially if you look at China, China has actually increased their environmental regulation, particularly around water and waste, so that in order that they protect their country and so that the environment doesn't become a source of social instability.
Right.
Because that will jeopardize growth. And you can't jeopardize growth because that's, that will not present anyone opportunities to to grow in the future. But basically, the environment, and we know that in Asia, where China goes, the rest of Asia will go too, because China's the biggest. It sets the standard. It's the market maker.
Right.
So now China's increasing a lot of environmental regulations, and they're really serious about it. I mean, trading, emissions trading regions, environmental tax, factory shutdowns. There's some statistic which said that in 2017, there was something like 18,000 factory shutdowns. Not permanent shutdowns, but shutdowns meaning that the factory had to shut down for at least a day. And I mean, that's pretty serious if you think about the role of manufacturing in China's economy. Manufacturing is still almost 40 to 45%, if not more. So, because consumption hasn't gone up that much. But for a manufacturing-based economy, for the government to be shutting down manufacturers, then things must be really serious. So, I mean, they are very forthright about wanting to clean up their environment because they realize that you cannot grow first and clean up, that it's more costly, so you better grow right. And I think that lesson is one that deserves to be shared very widely amongst developing countries. And hopefully they'll be picking up on that.
Right. And they also have the benefit of you learning from the other countries that have already gone through sort of industrial expansion and also the expansion of their middle class. So they can take all the lessons and best case and worst case scenarios from countries like, the United States or continents like Europe and sort of improve as time goes on.
That's the ideal. Unfortunately, human history shows us that we are not that good at learning lessons of the past, but hopefully we'll be getting better in the future. And I guess my dream for Asia's development is that we can find the model of development which is both fast and clean and socially inclusive. Because if you look around at when Europe and America went through, especially the age of automation and the building of a post-industrial economy, they always lost one element. Okay, and so now that we have all of the lessons, then Asia really has a chance to kind of model, be the new paradigm. So that's kind of a long-off wish.
No, it's interesting. Going back to SMEs for a second. What would you say are the biggest challenges that they can expect when trying to implement a sustainability strategy?
So the biggest problem is a capability gap, in that small and medium-sized enterprises that they usually have very thin margins, and they don't have a lot of access to the kind of knowledge and knowledge networks and also financing, which would enable them to build the capabilities to move to the next level. So it's all about value chain upgrading, which is also about capability upgrading. And so SMEs, since they don't have many resources, they tend to fall short in those areas. They tend to be very pragmatic, at least in Asia. And so pragmatic basically translates into, in some cases, very short term. And so if you're engaged in educating people and building future capabilities, the return's not going to come on a horizon that you can necessarily see today. So that's even why the Fung Academy was started, is because we know that the business is so busy making the business happen that sometimes the idea of building capability for tomorrow and building technologies for tomorrow and building systems that you will need to sustain your profits for tomorrow, that those sometimes they get placed in a second priority simply because there's no fire burning down today.
Right.
So we are so busy focusing on today that we forget about tomorrow. So I think for SMEs, we need to support them with better access to knowledge. And through the Fung Academy and through the Li and Fung and the Fung Group, we are providing like a lot of training courses. We have videos, digital videos on YouTube in 14 languages, seeking to educate our suppliers on different aspects of compliance, sustainability, and basic management and human resources practices. We are always trying to look for new ways to use technology to help businesses learn more faster and track their progress and bring their employees along with them. And I mean, if you think about today, the number of people who actually have access to those MOOCs and organizations like the Khan Academy and Coursera and so on, it's an amazing advancement in the world's ability to bring new knowledge to those who never had access to it before. So I believe that every business has a responsibility now to share their knowledge more widely. The one caveat would be there's got to be a balance between sharing what you know without stripping yourself of your competitive advantage. But if we take it if we think that the power of IP today is about the development of IP, the development of intellectual property, rather than the actual patent and IPR itself, then businesses should have an incentive to share their knowledge widely. And that's why there's so many good things being developed in collaborative networks involving competitors. It's because we realize the problems today is so complex that we need everybody to chip in. And how do we get everybody to chip in? It's because we believe that we will be unable to solve the problem in a reasonable time frame at a reasonable cost level by ourselves.
Right. So there is that sense of urgency, and the high tide raises all boats.
Exactly,
right.
Exactly.
And we do see that in the United States. Just use an example from just something that I'm familiar with is, for example, the Tesla patents for their batteries. Making those widely available to incentivize other companies in the automotive industry to also invest into those sustainable green energies. So I mean that's fantastic. While we're on the United States for a second, the winds are shifting a bit when it comes to investment into green technology and sustainability. Does that worry you at all, or is this a passing, something that will pass?
I think in the United States you still see. So in the United States, innovation is largely taking place, especially in technology, in the private sector.
Right.
And so that's why you have the FANGs. And I don't see that slowing down in any way, and obviously American companies have shared their knowledge widely, and so you have tons of sort of Uber clones in different sectors, right. and so on, Airbnb and so on. And I don't think the current environment is making them less or more predisposed. In fact, the U.S. still has such a strong innovation culture because it can attract the best and the brightest minds from all around the world. That may be changing with kind of visa issues, but I don't actually see that as that much of a risk.
Okay.
The question is, you see another very strong source of innovation around technology coming up in China, which is a different model. It's not a private sector-led model. It is actually a state-led model. So, I think the big question is, how is the world going to adjust to having these two different models of innovation? And at a certain point, it's not just about innovation, it's actually about everything. So it's about innovation in finance, and innovation in sustainability, innovation in social areas. And I think it's a very valid question for places like Asia or Latin America, where these two models, they are circling above. And which model are we going to adopt?
Right.
And can we actually have both? Because ideally, we want to have both, because there's great things coming out of both models. And
competition drives innovation.
Yeah, well, I think that's a big question, is can you direct innovation to solve public public problems as they have in China. I mean, China was one of the first places that I saw solar lights, traffic lights, and electric buses, entire fleets going electric buses and electric taxis and so on. And I mean, there's a lot to be said for how they're using technology to make life better and to really be developing the model of a smart city. And I think there's a lot of advantages to that. There's also a lot of risks too, and so we have to see which model is going to prevail.
Right.
Hopefully both.
Yeah. Speaking of technology, how is in the digital world? How do you think that this has impacted accountability?
How does it impact?
How do you think that technology has impacted accountability in today's digital world? When it comes to whether it's large businesses, making sure that they are accountable to their sustainable goals, or whether it's on an environmental or a social level. So if you take a look at the largest companies or even SMEs, how has technology and the rise of the digital ecosystem impacted this?
So technology basically, it forces you to be more accountable, and it forces you to be more transparent because you have the ability to be more transparent because you're actually putting technology into the field, into your operations, so that you actually have that data.
Right.
20 years ago, if we wanted to find out what is the carbon emissions of a given factory, we have to send them an Excel spreadsheet and they have to write it down, and they're probably going to be wrong. So in today's environment, we could actually put a sensor in that factory and stream their data to us. It's always going to be correct. It's going to be very granular. It's going to be real time. And so we have that ability to manipulate that data in order to improve the actual conditions on the supply chain. So it's a very, very different capability. And today, the price of technology, because computing power has become so cheap, it's actually the technology has fallen so much that it's actually becoming accessible even for small and medium-sized enterprises. Now, what do we do with that data? Do we keep it within our own walls as a competitive advantage, or do we package it in ways that could actually help improve conditions on a larger scale? That's the question with transparency and accountability. It's like, how much do you share? And how much does your sharing raise the expectations of your stakeholders to a level where you may not be able to meet them? And that's the risk. So that's, I think, where regulation comes in, because regulation is all about leveling the playing field. So if we think back, in 2015, the UK launched a UK Modern Slavery Act, which required all UK companies above a certain size to disclose how they're preventing and mitigating the possibility of modern slavery in their supply chain and in their organizations. And this was a really seminal move because UK was one of the first nations to do this. But I think the genesis of it was that there were companies which were disclosing how they're treating modern slavery in their supply chain. Some of the most responsible companies in the UK were doing this, and they were doing it voluntarily because they wanted to be transparent, because they wanted to do the right thing, and because they admitted there's a problem. It's not that because there was a problem, it's because they were the only ones who admitted it. Okay. So, and then what happened is they found they were tagged with the issue of modern slavery. So, the public, because they were the ones disclosing, they're all very well-known companies. I mean, if you think of the best names in the UK, that's who was disclosing, and it wasn't right that because they're doing the right thing, then they become associated with the problem. So I think a lot of the encouragement from them to the government to launch the Modern Slavery Act was to say, okay, it's not fair because So. How does our transparency and our accountability, that should actually be taken up by everyone in the industry so that we are not affiliated with a problem that is everybody's problem. And I think the role of government in creating that level playing field is really essential, because you can always have a few companies who are taking leadership positions and trying to deal with problems and admitting that they are problems and being very transparent about it. And the key is you have to lift the whole floor of the industry to still a level that they can reach, It won't be the level of the leaders, but at least to the level of compliance and a minimum recognition. And I think in the future, every company is going to have to be more transparent. And so we better get ready for it now by shaping our own message and backing all that up with data and so on.
Right. One of the final points I wanted to touch on is to take the idea of raising these metrics even higher at a macro level, and it's to talk about the sustainable development goals. So what can you tell us about the Sustainable Development Goals as a whole? So the ICC has been an important proponent of this project for the last few years, but with the Fung Academy and with the Fung Group, how have you sort of navigated these goals, and how have they filtered through into the strategy that you've been adopting?
The Sustainable Development Goals have really been instrumental in helping companies focus their attentions in a few areas where they can really have impact. So I actually don't know if there's any companies which are doing all 17 Sustainable Development Goals, and maybe there are, but I don't know any of them. What most companies are doing, including us, is we take our existing programs and we sort of put them in to the SDGs, to a few SDGs, and it usually covers 5 or 6. And then we look, how do we fill that out? How do we make it more integrated? How do we make it more complete? Are these actually the areas that we want to be active in? And if we think 10 years ahead, what is the legacy that we want to have? So the SDGs have helped us because out of the 17, you're bound to be active in a few, and they help us kind of complete our thinking around what we want our impact to be. I think for the SDGs, the whole movement, the key is how does the SDGs stimulate additionality? Because what we don't want is for companies just to use it as a different matrix. For their existing activities. What should be happening is that we put it into the matrix and then we figure out where can we have impact? Where is our material sources of leverage? And and what should we use in order to create meaningful impact? And the SDGs, under every SDG, there's usually 10 or 15 different metrics. Targeting our programs to meet those metrics in the areas where, in the countries where the need is greatest is such a useful exercise. And, once having gone through the exercise, then we can actually be more proactive and smarter about where we're spending our resources. And if you take it down to another level, you actually have a matrix of your spend, including your employees' time, and your impact. And then the overlap with the business. And that is, that's what sustainability is all about. It's actually in creating social and environmental good while you're doing the course of your normal course of your business. So, the sustainable SDGs have been kind of a seminal moment for development globally. And I think the more that we recognize and the more that reporting, annual reporting and sustainability reporting can align with the SDGs, that will actually make our whole life easier. Because right now we have ESG, which is largely a stock market reporting framework. We have GRI and the SASB, which is largely a sustainability world reporting methodology. And then we have the SDGs, which is another type of reporting and impact tool. And so, we have to do all three, but actually they're talking about things that are actually quite similar. It's the same projects, same impacts, same resources. So how do we actually merge these together? Right. Because I think focus is always the precursor of impact.
Right. Yeah. No, finding those overlaps is going to be important. Great. So I have one last question as sort of a closing thought is, I'd say over the next 5 years, what do you think is going to be the biggest disruptor in the area of sustainability? What do you expect?
The biggest disruptor could be technology. Okay. In that we have to learn how to use technology to change the field of sustainability from being very audit and compliance based to being really exponential and focused on abundance. The other one is probably going to be more attention to social issues, like the return of human rights, as well as climate change. That's more than one. Okay, there's a lot to do because the world is still a very stark place depending on where you sit.
And those two go hand in hand.
Yeah.
Right. Great. Well, thank you again for making the time,
Yeah,
and we hope to do
very
this
much.
again soon.
Okay.
Thank you. As a reminder, we will be hosting live broadcasts every month. So if you're listening, remember to sign up on our website for free and subscribe to our YouTube channel. And ladies and gentlemen, this has been another episode of the ICC Livecast. See you next time.